The professor, the banker, and the suicide king inside the richest poker game of all time. And our guest today, he wrote it. Michael Craig, who was a securities attorney in Chicago for 15 years, now resides in Arizona. Michael, thanks for joining us, man.
Oh, thanks for having me on, Derek. It's nice to hear that people like the book, that people still read it, and when Andy Beal comes back to Las Vegas, people hear about the story and want to look into it again.
I'll tell you, this is a great thrill for me because I have to say, I have three favorite poker books. One of a Kind, The Stu Unger Story by Nolan Dalla, Positively Fifth Street by James McManus, and yours is my absolute favorite, The Professor, the Banker, and the Suicide King. By the way, it came out in 2005. What kind of response have you had from the poker community to the book? And personally, what has writing it meant to you over the course of the last 9 years?
Thanks, Derek. Before I answer, I want to say, especially because I interrupted your answer, to tell you how much I like Nolan Dalla's book. Jim McManus's book is also one of my favorites. I would also add Tony Holden's book, well as Al Alvarez's book, Big Deal by Tony Holden, and The Biggest Game Town by Al Alvarez. Of course, there are like tons of other great books, but I think it's an honor to be included in that group, and so I appreciate your including me in it. I never get tired of hearing good things about the book or having people tell me that they enjoyed it. When it came out, it was pretty big in poker because there's been a lot of stories about Andrew Beal playing the top pros as a group. There had been little bits and pieces leaking out. A few websites had written about some of the individual results, or occasionally would write, the banker was seen at the Bellagio last night, or there's a rumor that he's coming back into town. And there were a couple newspaper articles that briefly mentioned some of the games and the size of those games, but there wasn't anybody that really tried to document it. And so it was more than an urban legend in poker, but it wasn't something that was described as you might describe, a big baseball game or a big football game, and I tried to bring some of that to it. Obviously, it was a cash game, so it wasn't like there was a competition in a sense that it was a championship or an elimination or something like that. They played over a number of years, and so there were winners and losers throughout that time, and people wanted to hear about who was winning and who was losing and what the games were like. I was gratified by the result. I ended up researching the book because I heard about the story while I was in Las Vegas one time and wanted to know more about it. And I saw that there wasn't much there. And so, I wanted to learn it. So I wrote it. And I found a lot of people felt the same way. And so it created a lot of interest in high stakes poker, the interest that was already there at a time when poker was really starting to explode online and on television. And so I think that the book helped fuel those things, but it also got a great boost because those developments were already happening. And, over the 9 years since, the book continues to sell well. It now sells well on Kindle. I'm hoping that I can get the publisher to come out with the 10th anniversary version this year that incorporates some of the later things I've written, some things that weren't in the book. But it's been a wonderful experience for me.
I always wondered, it's like a singer with a number one hit. It changes their life, but then they have to sing it every night the rest of their life. I wonder, do you ever get tired talking about it?
No, I don't. I saw an interview on VH1 years ago with the guy from Flock of Seagulls, that song I Ran, the guy with the gigantic reverse mohawk, and he still sang the song in concert, but he seemed, I remember in the interview, a little bit resentful that was the song everybody wanted to see, or that people were a little vaguely disappointed that he had a receding hairline and didn't have like a giant ducktail anti-mohawk or whatever he had back in 1984. In my case, I'm happy to have that moment frozen in time with me as a commentator in it. It was a great story to research, great stories to tell. Whatever the principles end up in the news, it adds a piece to the story. People ask me about it. For a few years afterwards, I was very, very close with Andy Beal and with the pros, and was involved in them playing a return match in early 2007, and have been friendly with all the people involved in the story ever since. So, as recently as a week ago, I was talking with one of the participants in the story, and I just cherish the fact that I'm friends with these people. That wouldn't have happened without this, and that whenever I go and sit down at a poker table someplace, if I feel like I'm not sufficiently the center of attention because of my great play or great jokes, I can just say something like, "So, what type of poker books you guys like?" So somebody mentions the Professor, the Baker, and the Suicide King, and then just kind of pipe up that I wrote that. Like it just sort of came up in conversation without me.
Well, I'll tell you what, it certainly is a feather in the cap. And let me give a quick synopsis. It's about a billionaire banker, Andy Beal, who, like a lot of us, loves poker, but unlike most of us, has the means to actually sit down with the top pros at their stakes and then some. And he sets his sights on beating the best of the best. And he really put a scare into some of the elite players because for a while he was winning. Essentially, Michael, he thought he could raise the stakes high enough that he could take the pros out of their comfort zone, right? What kind of guy was Andy Beal? He seems like an enigma.
He's a very private guy. At first, I thought of him as reclusive. He's definitely not reclusive, and he's a very friendly, outgoing person. But he is he's very private. He recognizes that he can attain great success in life in areas where a number of other people have needed to court public favor. That he could do that without it. So as a result, he's now, I'm pretty sure he's in the top 50 of the Forbes wealthiest Americans. I know I used to have a thing where when they would come out with the list each September, I would email him and I would say to him, "Andy, I saw the new Forbes list. As usual, you're on it and I'm not. And I know that's bad news for both of us." And that's really the way he felt. I mean, he liked flying underneath the radar. Well, I mean, once you get to about $15 billion, it's just not possible anymore. And so he tried to keep all his activities, whether it's banking or poker or personal life, underneath the radar. But, I think that he's kind of made peace with the fact that there are going to be quarters where whatever he does, people are going to be interested in it. And so he usually politely declines interviews or politely declines to be a controversial person. But he's a very nice, very friendly guy. On the other hand, once you see his competitive side and you get the idea of the intelligence that's lurking, not even necessarily verbal, but whether it's a statistical or mathematical or analytical, that even though he's a fairly plain-spoken person and he's kind of friendly, you get an idea that there's like a gigantic IQ back there and just an inexhaustible, set of resources to try to, work things out.
Well, I'll tell you what, he is a smart cookie because he came up with this strategy that, hey, if we get the blinds so high, these top players might actually be uncomfortable, and hence that's why the corporation came to be. So the guy had some sense to him, and for a while there, I mean, he had them running, didn't he?
Oh, yes. I think that the games are so much bigger now, or at least have, if not today, so much bigger. Certainly when a lot of the players were involved in online poker and were either making those fortunes or were, making fortunes connected with the online sites, that, the games had gotten so big that it's pretty difficult, to rattle them. But when you go back to like 2000 and you say, okay, let's play for $1 million. Well, it's like, these guys, they generally had net worths of that, but what they had sitting in their box at the Bellagio wasn't necessarily $1 million. And so, they put the money together, and as he ratcheted the stakes up, that made it more difficult for them. And so there's also the team dynamic. I mean, he's playing on his own money, and he's got a pretty big supply of that. They don't have as big a supply, but, they're sharing a bankroll to play them heads up. But, once person A plays and wins, then person B plays and wins. Well, when person C comes in there, if they don't win, there's like this, this kind of like perception of shunning going on. Everybody's beating them but me, and that puts a certain type of pressure on them. So you get a situation when he's losing, the people who are playing him are feeling pressure because everybody else is beating him, or when he's winning, the people who are playing him are feeling pressure because everybody else is saying, "Come on, you got to step up here." Then you get situations where there are people who put up money and haven't played him, and then other people in the group are saying, "Well, this guy is, he's all critical of us. He's not playing Beal, and I wouldn't want him to play Beal, but here he is all critical that I lost to him yesterday." And so, it takes advantage of a group dynamic that includes both, the lack of comfort with the stakes, and also the fact that poker players generally are not team players. They play for themselves, and while they sometimes have financial financial arrangements with others, they generally like to play free of financial constraints, and the idea that other people are looking over their shoulder in such a systematic way is a little unnerving to them. That's obviously something Andy did not have to deal with.
Right. Listen, I got a two-part question here because I'm fascinated by the corporation itself. So if you could talk about some of the members in the corporation, and we're talking about the best of the best. I mean, these guys are literally at the top of the poker world. And the other guy I really want you to talk a few sentences about is Ted Forrest, because I find that guy fascinating. And I love the way the book starts. I mean,
one of the most interesting people I've ever met in poker.
I just love the way the book starts. I mean, he finds out about this high-stakes cash game. I mean, his eyes must have just came right out of his head when he heard the stakes. He goes and gets all of his money out of the Bellagio locker, and he puts it on the table. I mean, that's poker in a nutshell, isn't it? I mean, guys take chances.
Oh, yeah, well, especially, I mean, Ted was on this heater at the time where he won like $1 million over the last few months, and, the money's split between a few places, and he's doing other things with the money, but, it's like he's won quite a bit of money, and he's playing with 100% of his bankroll, and it's not a matter that he's going to be broke forever if he loses it, but it's just, $500,000 is a pretty small, that's the amount he had in his box at the Bellagio. $500,000 is a tiny amount to bring into a $10,000, $20,000 game. I mean, that would be, that'd be the equivalent of bringing $500 into a $10, $20 limit game, which is, that's not super short. I mean, I've played games with that amount of money, but I've never played them where I couldn't just easily go another 500 or another 500 after that. And I haven't done it playing heads up where, in 4 or 5 hands you could lose a big chunk of it, which is what happened to him. And that's how the book starts. And Ted is I really think of him as the biggest gambler in the world. I mean, whatever he's got, he's going to put it on the line. And he's I found him to be a really nice guy and a great storyteller. And, his stories invariably involve him getting into some kind of fix. He's had up times and down times. But, I mean, I think that he's generally the same guy, whether he's up $1 million or down $1 million. And I always figured that if he's in one direction or the other, there's a decent chance he'll get himself fixed up because he's a great gambler and great instincts. On the other hand, the money doesn't matter to him, so he's not out there to get ahead and then quit.
Now, the corporation was made up of people like DOYLE, BRUNSON, TODD Brunson, Chip Reese, Howard Lederer, Jennifer Harman, Phil Ivey, Lyle Berman. Who was Beal's toughest opponent of the bunch?
It kind of depends at different times. Initially, the first year or two of games that they played, because Beal would come to town sometimes for a week, and he would play groups of players that were combining their bankroll. I think that the person he had the most trouble with initially was Howard Lederer. Howard had a very analytical approach to the game, and I think that he may have been the first one to pick up on what Andy's approach was and how to exploit it. Andy then stayed away after September 11, 2001, primarily because the financial havoc caused by the terrorist attacks had changed his banking business so much that he had to really get to work on his banking. But back in 2003 and 2004, Howard had some success against him, but also saw that his game had improved quite a bit. Jennifer Harman had a period of some great success against him. She's an extremely tenacious heads-up player. And Todd Brunson, who was not part of the group in the earliest games, also had a great deal of success. So at one time I would say Howard was the go-to guy. At another time I would say either Howard or Jennifer or Todd. In all those games, Phil Ivey wasn't really part of the group, but Phil was playing in high-stakes games, but not the highest games. This is when he was, like in his mid-20s. So he was playing phenomenally well in tournaments and making a reputation for himself in high-stakes games. He was not playing the very biggest game every place, or at least generally more on the East Coast or in Los Angeles, and not as much in Vegas, where the games kind of started as everybody in town put their money together to play Andy, so Phil wasn't really part of that initially. But by 2007, after my book had come out, after there was kind of like some sniping between Beal and some of the players about each other's accounts in the book, primarily from Andy, that he felt that some of the players didn't give him sufficient credit. I don't think that was the case, but these were competitive people, and Andy, although he had claimed he was done with poker, kind of got back into it, and they played some more. Phil Ivey ended up being the go-to guy. Ted Forrest also early on was one of the heroes of the games. He did not do so well against Andy in the 2007 games, and it was Ivey that came at the end of the games in 2007 and won $17.5 million in 3 days, which wiped out the deficit that the other players had accumulated and also got them a $10 million profit all in one day.
That is unbelievable. And I think, what I read, if my memory serves me correct, the highest they got was 50 and 100, but I think Beal wanted to take it up even higher than that. As a guy with an investment background, you're sitting there watching these guys throw around staggering amounts of money. I can only imagine the swings. Did it just blow your mind the sums these guys were willing to gamble on the turn of a card? Or as an investor, did it all make sense to you when you finally saw what was happening?
I got to sit at the table when they played for 3 weeks in 2007, and it's remarkably easy, and this is why the casinos, this is what keeps the lights on in the casinos, to forget about the stakes, because these are just pieces of plastic. Now, these pieces of plastic are kind of bronze colored or brown colored, so they're a different denomination than any pieces of plastic you ever see in a casino, and they say on them, they say on them $25,000, and they've got big piles of them. But once you get in the game, it's like, okay, this is a 4-chip, 8-chip game, and I don't think the players playing in the game, certainly not Andy, certainly not the pros, are thinking about the chips. Again, the pros, that's their way of doing things. They don't think about the money. They're thinking about making the right decisions. So they're thinking of these things as units, not as Toyota Camrys that they're throwing around or something like that. And Beal is trying to do the same thing, and also to him that it's more a matter that he wants to beat them rather than that he's got to deal financially with the consequences of losing. So once they get in the game, it's just it's just remarkably simple to have pots go $500,000, $1 million one way or another, and nobody really think about it much. Every so often, though, somebody would say, after a particular pot, they'd say, "Wow, that's just $1.5 million." It was almost like just they're surprised that they even noticed it, or and Andy and the players usually played in silence, but every so often somebody would pipe up something like that, and Andy would say that, and Ted Forrest across from would say, "Yeah, I guess get a couple of hands like that, we'll be talking real money." And or at the end of the day, when Phil Ivey was playing Andy, and Andy did want to play higher. He actually played the Chip Reese one time, 100 and 200,000, but when he was playing the pros in 2007, when I was watching the games, they were playing 25, 50,000 blinds, 50 and 100,000 limits. And after Andy had gotten ahead and came back, they would only play 30,000, 60,000 blinds. And the problem that Andy had with this is that he wanted to use just one denomination of chip, because he didn't want to fumble around with his chips, or that they would get some kind of tell on him if he was having to figure out what to do. That he wanted it to be 3-chip, 6-chip, or 4-chip, 8-chip. He didn't want to have 2 different denominations and different chips where some of his thought process might be translated into his motions. So they ended up using the bigger chips, and then at the end of the day, the winner gave back the proportional. They used the chip as markers, and they settled up. Well, because the math didn't work out exactly right, there was like $5 or $10 or $15,000 off in the translation each day, and so they would just flip a coin for it. And even though Andy had lost $3 million the first day and $4 million the second day, the thing that kind of stung him is at the end of the day, it's okay, well, we have to flip for that odd $15,000 when we settled up, because we only have $25,000 chips. And Andy lost the coin flips both days, and it's geez, my luck is really bad. When you're trying to decide if you've lost, $2,510,000 or $2,525,000, and the coin flip is just to determine which one, it really doesn't make that much difference, but it kind of takes you away from the game a bit, where you think, hey, I just flipped a coin and lost $15,000. And so that was one of the few instances, but it was generally treated as great sport and great fun and great competition. And yes, it was high stakes, but for these guys, that just made it more fun. And I was not involved in the game that Andy had played last weekend against Todd Brunson, but from what I read online, when Todd had won the last hand that supposedly, had cleaned out Andy. I heard that, that Andy, gave Todd a high five. That was consistent with the way I saw the games too. That it was, that Andy, when he won, he was high on his victory, and he expected that the losers would be happy for him. Which, but when he lost, he said, "Hey, good job," even though he'd lost millions of dollars that day.
I'm wondering what you think of a high-stakes poker player. I mean, you had a front-row seat to the biggest game of all time. What do you think of these guys that throw around money like it's nothing? And then, what do you think of poker in terms of a sporting event, where it ranks? I mean, you've got the Olympics, the World Cup, the Super Bowl, but poker is worldwide now, and the November 9, I mean, that's a spectacle.
It is a spectacle. I was involved a few years ago with a professional poker league. It was called Epic Poker, and it didn't last long. Certainly, one of the things that hurt it was that online poker was shut down in the United States. It was based primarily in the U.S., and there was like a whole group of sponsorships and access to money that it didn't have. But I liked the idea of treating professional poker players as elite competitors and having elite pros only competition, where it was a league, you'd have a series of competitions, and it was a championship, but kind of like golf's majors.
Right.
I think that that's something that poker would still benefit from, and I think that obviously whoever puts that together successfully would benefit from it. But I even think the World Poker Tour, the World Series, the European Tour, the Heartland Poker Tour, any other poker tour would benefit from it, because just like PGA Tour stops are popular and do well on TV, there's a certain cachet of of something like the majors, or when the tours have like the Tour Championship at the end of the year. I think that gives people. I think that spectators like there to be leagues and rotations, and while the World Series of Poker is just unequaled spectacle and phenomenon, and obviously winning the main event is the biggest thing in poker, and maybe the biggest thing in any sporting event, any sporting competition. I think there's something fun about the idea of taking the recognized best players and just kind of watching what happens to them in a competitive situation where it's them and just them, and they do it a number of times so that you can say, okay, they butted heads, and this is who is truly the best in that situation. I think that's what the original World Series of Poker was, when Jack and Benny Binion got together their buddies who were like the 6 or 10 best poker players in the world. They just got them together. Everybody played on their own bankroll for a week, and then at the end of the time, they voted on who they thought was the best. That was in 1970, and they all voted for themselves. And so Jack Binion said, "Okay, well, who do you think is second best?" And that's how they picked Johnny Moss. And then after that, they played for a week the same way, except they ended it with $10,000 no limit hold freeze out, and that got bigger and bigger, and the World Series became obviously something much bigger and much more a part of poker life and public life. But it really started out as an opportunity to see like the best take on the best, and I think that anything that promotes that is good for the entire activity, regardless of who it is that succeeds in making up some kind of side competition of the best against the best.
Michael, we really appreciate your time. We've only got a couple minutes left. I know you're working on a new project. I used to live in Calgary, Alberta, and for people that don't know, Calgary's got like 24/7 casinos here, there, and everywhere. It's a big gambling town. Now, why would a guy from Arizona have any interest in Calgary? I'll preface it by saying that with the proliferation of poker, it's become segmented, right? You've got heads-up specialists, sit-and-go specialists, tournament specialists, cash game specialists, proving that when there's money involved, the sharks will come, they will learn how to master it and exploit the game. And I guess that's what's happening with these researchers in Calgary, Alberta, no?
Yeah, it's, in every sort of financial risk or speculative situation, you're going to get people who look for an edge. I mean, there are people who are better than others at rock, paper, scissors for big money. What the fellas that I'm reading about and trying to write about in Alberta have done. It's a group of computer scientists led by Michael Bowling, a professor in computing science at the University of Alberta. They've been working for about a decade on using computers and game theory to figure out optimal poker strategy. They focused on heads-up limit hold'em because that's the form of poker that is played on any type of regular basis and has a limited definable number of decisions. Now, the limited definable number of decisions is something like 3.16 times 10 to the 14th power. So we're talking about like 316 trillion decision points, because you take every possible hand a person could have against every possible unknown hand another person could have, and each bet, raise, fold situation, you get, and then each card that possibly comes up on the board, you get 316 trillion possibilities. So it's no easy task to say heads up limit hold'em is easy to solve. But the idea that these guys came up with is to try to build a computer program that figures out the game theoretical optimal strategy. And they declared recently, and the paper is available online if you look under Michael Bowling, and the provocative title, Heads Up Limit Hold'em Poker is Solved. They published in Science Magazine earlier this month that Heads Up Limit Hold'em Poker is solved. And I want to understand what that means, both as far as game theory, as far as poker as a game of skill, and as far as what it means to you and I, who want to just take out a deck of cards, each put up $50 and play some 50-cent dollar heads up hold'em. What it means to say heads up limit hold'em poker is solved. I don't think machines, even in solving heads up poker, can beat Phil Ivey every time. What I'm trying to figure out is exactly what it means to say heads up limit hold'em poker is solved, and try to explain that. I also think that one of the things that happens is the people who have a better understanding of the technology and its application will have an advantage in poker, just like the first group of people to read Super System had an advantage over the people who thought that they were just playing for luck.
Right.
And so the ultimate effect should be positive for poker, because as people understand the program and they understand what it means to say that the game is solved, they start learning practical strategies. Like, for instance, in heads up limit hold'em poker, you should never limp when you're on the button. A lot of people in poker do that, but there are plenty of people, including some smart people, who sometimes think you should limp. That's been proven now statistically to be a bad idea. The people who never limp are in a better position than the people who sometimes do limp when they're on the button in heads up hold'em. The people who don't limp benefit from knowing this. Eventually, everybody else is going to know it, partly because it's been statistically proven. So, generally, elements of skill in the game, as they become publicized, lift everybody else's quality of play.
I'll tell you what, man, this has been a real treat for me. I'm a big fan of the book. I'm a big fan of yours. Michael Craig, author of The Professor, The Banker, and The Suicide King. And let me tell you, if you are a poker fan and you haven't got this in your collection, get it today. The Professor, The Banker, and The Suicide King. Michael, thanks a lot for your time, man. Really appreciated it.
Well, thanks for having me on. I hope you have me back.